Tamara Logsdon Hawkinson. I'm Guy's eldest daughter. My two sisters are back there. So this little adorable guy over here is our dad, Guy. And we put that in there because that's about the age he was when he got interested in Woody. He lived in Ada, and I'm doing a thing tomorrow that has more clips in it, but it turns out he had a high school English teacher who a couple decades before, he lived in Ada, a couple decades before had been Woody Guthrie's high school English teacher in Okemah. And I actually he recorded him in the early 60s, and we got that transcribed, and if you come tomorrow, you get to hear a little clip. But our dad, there were 5 kids. They had the Logsdon Failing Band that played all over kind of southeastern Oklahoma, but then he also was in I'll come back to that, but he also he had his own band in high school. So Mr. Harrison had said, you might be interested in this guy I used to teach, Woody. So my dad got interested, and he and our mom at East Central married very quickly, and she's from Okemah. So one of my dad's favorite quotes was, and then they started having the 3 of us came within like 4 years. So Mother liked to come home to Okemah on the weekend. And my dad, one of his quotes is, well, what would you rather do? Go to the bars and learn about Woody, or visit with your mother-in-law all weekend? So what we've learned, though, and you'll hear this name kind of go through as we go through this program, it's Colonel Martin. He was one of Woody's friends in high school. He was one of the gang. He was the one, if you've read Bound for Glory, gets beamed on the back of the head. And so Colonel Martin had stayed here. He owned a bar, Colonel Martin's bar, that was downtown. And so my dad would go there and visit with him. And there were still others alive. And so he had to set about learning about Woody that way. But before we get to all of that, I'm just going to go through some early Okemah pictures. Now, Charlie Guthrie moved to the area in 1898 to work for the Spalding Ranch. So he was basically a cowboy. And this is a picture, I think it's around 1902. Okemah became a town in 1902. So these, it was pretty much of a bustling town. And then there was this. And this was the old rail tracks. And the big joke was they weren't on time. You never knew where you'd go or when you'd get there if you took the street. And it was eventually. This is the old Broadmoor Hotel. It was down on, I can't remember what cross it was, down Main Street a little bit. Woody came through in 1952. That's a whole different story. And he wrote a 12 handwritten page note called Alcohol and Me and the People of Okemah. And I've got about half of it transcribed, but at the end it says, he signed it, Woody Guthrie, April 1952. He was here for Pioneer Day at Broadmoor Hotel. So that's where he had stayed then. Now, you guys may know Okemah was what was called a sundown town. And that means if you were color, which basically meant black, you could not be in Okemah like after 6, basically. And this was just insane. But this was all, you can see it's the Okemah Clan number 12. It's just crazy, but I had to put these up here because that was the era, and it was also the era where Lauren Nelson was lynched, but the Klan was very much a part of Okemah. They had parades, and so it's kind of difficult to talk about it now. In Joe, I don't know if anybody's read Joe Klein's book. He states that Charlie was in the Klan and was part of the hanging. But I've listened to, and he got that from Claude, his uncle. But when you listen to Claude's interviews, it's obvious he wasn't here. He didn't even live nearby. He just said, oh yeah, when I heard about that, I was like, oh, that old Charlie must have been part of it. But then it was just taken for granted after it came out in Joe's book that he was in the Klan and was involved in the lynching. But that's really, nobody knows. And my dad has always maintained he wasn't the type of person who, he was very proper. And there are a lot of interviews with Mary Jo, and she talks about her dad being misrepresented in his book. So I'm just going to say that for the record. Now, this is some of the old Guthrie family, because they all kind of came to this area, and you could, like, the Mon, Laura Bell, Aunt Maud, Jeff. This is the extended Guthrie family, and it says that number 5 over is Woody, but I'm going to have to get, I thought Marie might be here. Marie is Woody's niece and Roy's daughter, and I thought maybe she could help me go through, because Jack is, the one on the left is, it's either the one on the left or the other one in the hat. That's Jack Guthrie, and he's really tall. And then it says Woody's just a couple over, but I don't see, and Woody was fairly short, so it doesn't quite make sense. But this is of the Guthrie family. And then this is part of our family collection, and I'll tell you who these people, and it's on glass. I don't know exact, but, let's see, just hang up. Oh, oops. Okay, so on the top picture on the left, that is Charlie's sister, Laura. Then the guy in the middle is their grandfather, who was, his name was Jeremiah, but they called her Jerry. On the right is Maud holding the child. And you'll hear more about Maud, because as Nora gets more and more problematic with her Huntington's, George and Mary Jo were sent to live in Texas with her Aunt Maud. So, and then to the right is a brother John, and then that is Charlie Guthrie on the right. And Mary Jo talked about how even in his, like, he's basically a pauper at the end of his years. I mean, Plymouth City, he always dressed nicely. And then down at the bottom is Jeff, and on the left, and he's the one who taught Woody to fiddle. He was a musician who also often would play with them, and Jack and Woody, there were several of the family who would play together different times. And Gid is a brother and a son. And then on the right is Claude. Those are the 3 brothers of Charlie. And Claude is, my dad has over an hour-long interview with Claude from like 1968 that I haven't fully been able to make it through. Then he has 2 that are with Jeff and Claude. And so Claude kind of figures into a lot of the info. And then on the bottom, if you see the darker figure on the left, that is Nora Guthrie. And then there are some other family members, and Maud is over there too, but I can't remember if she's the second or the third one. Anyway, I don't know where he got it. Lucretia Chance, Mary Jo might have given it to him, but it's a piece of glass, and it looks just like that. It's got the tape and ribbon, and it's color photos. So it's, of course, wrapped up tightly and very carefully protected. But that kind of gives you a sense of the Guthrie family at the time. This is Charlie and Nora. These photos are fairly well seen. But again, you could see how nicely Charlie at one point was thought to be one of the wealthiest people here in Okefusty County. And Nora. Oh, how do I start this? There's a video here. Oh, there we go.
Married to Sherman. See that? He's the man that was bound. You know that dang disease that Woody died with? Yeah, that come from Sherman's side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, there's really no way of knowing, but it's possible that you might ask. He'd have a season and he'd right.
Okay, so that was Claude talking. And we know now Huntington's is inherited, but they didn't know it back then. Nora, well, she was known as Nora Tanner Guthrie. Her natural father was George Sherman. And they had 3 daughters. Nora was one. And he was going across a creek, fell off the horse and hit his head at the ground. And everybody in the family then, I don't know, started thinking that he actually had a Huntington's episode that threw him off the horse. Now, what I haven't been able to find out, and I'm kind of talking to Anna and Annie Guthrie, was there any research done on the 2 sisters? Did either of them end up with Huntington's? And and then there's nothing any further back. There's basically no Sherman. But so her mother was a school teacher. After George Sherman dies, she marries Mr. Tanner, and they all take the last name Tanner. So this is Nora, Charlie, Roy, and Clara. And just, as a side thing, the photographer who took this is the same photographer who did the photos of the lynching that are on the wall back there. And then this is Woody with the hat to the right with George and Charlie. Now, Charlie was incredible. He was brilliant. And he wrote all of these books and everything. This one, The Procrastination, and where's my notes? It was 24 pages. He would write these, publish, and sell them. So we have a copy of this one. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was 24 pages. Then in the meantime, he wrote this, I can't ever remember how to say it, Qumran, which was a newsletter, an anti-socialist newsletter. And you may not remember or know, but, and it was as we went through the 20s, Oklahoma had the largest population of socialist party members of any state in the Union. And it predominantly was the farmers, because they were like, I'm trying to think of the sharecroppers, basically, where they would go in, and Woody talks later about working for a cotton farm. The first thing you do when you go in, they sign you up at the store, and he said he worked for 2 or 3 weeks and owed $9.
Wow.
And that's basically what started kind of the bigger socialist push, which could be something to talk about. This, and then this is A Discussion of Scientific Socialism. And it is 89 pages. And I mean, it is detailed with chapters. But this is hilarious. Socialism is implemented, women to be the economic equal of men under socialism. Yeah, I'll stay out of that. But then this is hilarious. This was Woody's birth announcement. The proud parent of an 8-pound Democrat boy. And so in a minute, we'll show you some information about the houses. But anyway, then it's hard to read over here, but he had stuck in the paper all the time. He was very active. And so it says, it's an article on what is a Baviers. But anyway, it's pretty funny. And then here are a couple pictures. That is Clara holding Woody. And then that's, I almost can't see. Oh, that's Clara and Woody with a doll.
Wow.
Now, this, I don't know if this is still available because it was published by the History Center.
Best dollar you can ever spend.
Huh?
It's the best dollar you can ever spend.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's a whole stack of them.
Oh, there are?
Yeah.
I would completely recommend this because, well, this woman thinks like my brain. Because I had never, I was like, when you read Bound for Glory, these things, that mainly they just were in the London house. And so I started hearing more and more. And what Larry Long came to Okemah in 88. This will be kind of some of my presentation tomorrow. This was his wife, and she's a researcher, and she talks about research methods, but she basically had the same questions I did. Well, where were these houses? Where were these locations? Because all anybody really knew was the London house. So she spent an enormous amount of time going through court records. And so my sisters, thank you, went around today. And now here's another thing that's incorrect in Bound for Glory. Woody talks about being around to when the house burned down. But it's not this house, but they built a big 2-story, really nice home. This is the lot it was on. If you're there now, you can look kind of straight towards the water tower. So it's, on the south side, and that's actually the house that's there. But at any rate, it was a big 2-story house. Over the years, a lot of people kind of started maybe blaming Nora because of the fire situation. But I did some research and found articles that had come out in the newspaper at the time. It was actually the house next door started on fire. And it leaped over and started the Guthrie house on fire. Charlie was able to get one of their horses. They had a stable in the back. He was able to get the horse out and the family out. Everything burned to the ground. And later on, and this is in Bound for Glory 2, Nora had this big glass ball, and she would say, before the fire, this was a crystal bowl that they'd been given, and that was basically all they had left. So they moved to the London house, and they hated it. And then a tornado ripped the roof off. So then they had to move again. And this time, so that was where the first one was. This is the London house, and sadly, it's not there. So these two pictures on either side are the lot where the London house was. That was carved, and it hasn't been maintained. We don't know if it's city property or who owns it, but it hadn't been mowed or maintained or anything, which is kind of too bad. Then after the tornado got ripped the top off, they moved to another house. And so she found all the fort records for the locations. And this is what's there now. So this was originally 212 North 9th Street. And when Roy was living, he had fond memories of that house. This is where that is now. Then, and sadly, that is where Clara dies. And, you know, the story, this is kind of interesting too. I mean, the main story was that Nora made her stay home to honor. And Claire, I guess, was a big tomboy. And, you know, just didn't always follow the rules. There's something I read about her getting in trouble at school a couple times. So she wasn't just a pushover, and she was mad because they were taking a test that day to see if she got to go to the next grade. So she did not want to stay home. And she started saying, well, I'm just going to kill myself. Now, the speculation is that she maybe just meant to kind of get her dress just lightly on fire, but it ended up consuming her. And there's been a variety of stories that, because she ironed with it had a kerosene ball at the end of the iron. There are stories that the iron exploded. There's stories that Nora threw, started her on fire. But basically, all of a sudden, she's up in flames. She runs out front. A neighbor comes. And then if you've read again, Bound for Glory, you read about Woody hearing, they came and found him. And it's such a sad. But when we're through, right over here is a full-page article about when she died. Because they were a pretty well-known family, and it was just a huge deal. So then they moved to, let's see, I want to do this in the correct order. Okay, they moved to one of Charlie's the farm. And so we didn't try to figure out where that was. But Woody said, my dad lost a farm a day for 30 days. And during that time, things are starting to head down for him. And he loses the farm, and they have to move out. So they moved to Oklahoma City because, remember, the Tanners, which are now, there's half brothers and sisters to Roy Clara, because Mary married the Tanner, and then she had more children with them. So I think it was Leonard Tanner was going to open a store in Oklahoma City, and Charlie was going to rent it. And like the day before they're to meet, Leonard is killed in a motorcycle accident. So there's, again, another disaster. So they moved back to Okemah into what Woody always calls the Jim Kane house. And even when he was here in 52, in that writing, he talks about looking for the Jim Kane house. This is where it sits, and I'll try to see if I can find the actual address. It's around Broadway and 10th, and it eventually was purchased by the city of Okemah, but it was then in that house because Nora is still with them, getting worse and worse. In the meantime, they've had George and Mary Jo, 2 more kids. And there's a story about Roy and Woody coming home and finding George diapered in a newspaper, and, Nora wasn't able to make dinner. So George and Mary Jo are sent to Texas to live with the Aunt Maud, who I pointed out on those earlier pictures. And Woody and many, many people for decades had no clue that there was anybody except Clara, Roy, and Woody. They knew nothing about these 2 other kids. And so, and you'll get to hear, I have a clip of B. Dill, who was an Okemah historian, who even when she found out about Mary Jo was like, "Oh no, that must be a niece. There wasn't. I know the family." So anyway, that is the house where then Charlie gets burned, and there is speculation again. You want to think he wakes up, he's on fire. You want to think that if she had a kerosene lantern, that she ended up having a fit and it burned it. Again, she just didn't. She was not naturally somebody who would have just set it on fire. I don't know, Reen, you can correct me when I'm. This is Roy's daughter, Roy and Ann's daughter. So, this is where the old Jim Kane house was. So, anyway, we'd like to hope Nora didn't actually throw stuff on him, but Charlie never ever would tell anybody what really happened. And then when I was listening to the Claude interview, Claude specifically says that Charlie told him he was responsible for Clara's death, that he made her go back in to do the dishes. And I thought, well, he must just be misremembering. But then the more I read about him and how much he loved Nora, I started thinking he just was protective of her. He didn't want her to be blamed for every bad thing that ever happened. So, anyway, that's what he told Charlie. But he wasn't there when Clara died, so we know that's not true. But, so Charlie he gets on fire. He has severe burns. And that he goes to Maud's house. In Bound for Glory, it says it's in Pampa, but it's not. He goes to Maud's house, and there's all these poultices and things that she does to help him heal, but it takes about 9 months, and that's where Mary Jo and George are. And that's when Woody and Roy, Dad, stayed behind and lived in this just kind of shack. And so those are the houses that sort of followed the Guthrie family during, in those early growing up days. Now, this is the yearbook, the 1929 yearbook that my dad has. And the guy over here on the right, Mr. Ott Harrison, is the teacher who taught both Woody and my dad. And he's over here too. So he knew Daddy was in a family band, plus he was in high school band. So he's the one who said, hey, you might be interested in learning about this musician. Okay, let me see.
I heard her as you were a very small little boy,
This is
and he sat up on his feet and laid at a desk all the time to make himself high enough to look and see. And he was a very interesting person, although he wasn't interested in schoolwork. He wanted to draw cartoons and do that type of artwork while he was supposed to be doing his English work.
So you hear the kind of stories like that from friends as well. He didn't really get in trouble, but he also didn't always do his homework. Now, so these are some of the friends and people that were around. We called him Woodrow, but you can see, and she was a high school friend, but you can see Woody he called himself Woody. And let's see, there were a couple of quotes in here I might have to, that is going to read. I'll have to pull this with me. Yeah, she said, the idea of our curly-haired classmate, Woody Guthrie, attaining such fame would have been a large joke, but had we laughed, we would have been wrong. So, anyway, and she tells more about it.
We built Triple Theater,
Okay, well,
all of us,
there. I'm gonna go back because we missed something. Okay, if this is the next clip. Oh, yeah, this is what we should have seen next. And this, she talked about, this was, again, one of his friends. And I just, as I'm reading this, have discovered he had a crush on this girl named Blanche. And he called her Bowleg Blanche. And he even talks about in Bound for Glory that he wrote his initials, and you can see, the concrete. But for a while, he was writing WBG. And everybody just teased him like crazy about it. And she talked, she said he was, he never got in trouble. He just was kind of fun and funny. So next, we're going to hear from another classmate. And this guy recorded his memories of Woody, sent him to someone here who sent him to my dad, and thanks to Garrett and Tate, we just got it transcribed. And he describes some of the funny stuff they do as kids. And you'll hear Colonel Martin's name again. And so...
We built Cricket Theater, all of us, Max and Rex Dawsey and Colonel Martin and Pete Morgan and me and Woody Guthrie and all 2 or 3 others. And there was no toilets or anything in those days. So we stayed in there 3 hours in that picture. Oh, when it's over, it left dark, and man, we'd about it. So run over. And we'd run down, our drugstore, see, and that shoe shop wasn't there. It's kind of a hangout over a shed over something. He put all his syrup cans out there. Always a big old pile of syrup cans. You run on, everyone's taking a leak on them. Well, after 4 or 5 months, that began to smell pretty bad, that guy. So he had a guy, had a guy working for him, and they had one of them old crank phones back there. And he wired them cans up with a phone. And he waited. When the show was out, he went back there and turned all the lights out, stood in one, and he just took over that helm. And everybody just, to see him real good, he just run just about a half a turn. And by the we turned about to it went. And it was months before anybody told us what happened. We thought, we almost got killed. We got some live wires.
So that was one of the funny stories. In this, we found, this is what the Crystal probably looked like back then. There were no bathrooms, so in case that was kind of hard, even though Garrett got the quality of the sound really so much better, but they would stay for 2 or 3 hours. And also in Bound for Glory, Woody and his mother would go to the Crystal for a long time, but there were no bathrooms then. After being there, they'd run across the street, pee in the cans, and then they zapped or went to the phone with the phone cord. And I just wanted to say that there were people at Okemah apparently doing okay, because as late as June 30th, 1946, old Doc Spickard, who was the doc still when I was little, only had to pay $1 to be able to prescribe opium and coca leaves. And apparently when one of the drugstores closed down, this seems a little questionable, but all of the records were left, and the History Center got them. And I've heard from people who have seen the records, yep, every woman in town was there once a month, maybe a prescription. Never lose. Okay, now, this is Mrs. V.K. Chowdy, and you'll hear a lot more about her if you come tomorrow, but she was instrumental in some of the work to get Woody recognized. But she also, I didn't realize this, she and our grandmother were really good friends. So I grew up around her. I just thought she was the most stately, but I was disappointed. I just didn't have enough time to look. What I remember is she just always wore these incredible hats and just Even my dad describes her with southern charm. Anyway, when Woody was homeless, Mrs. Chowning would just, she said, he just knew he could come in. I'd make him a sandwich, something to drink, and I'd encourage him to stay in school. And I might turn around and he'd be gone, or I might make him another sandwich. She had no expectations of how he should thank her or whatever. And she had no expectations of him either. And so that was pretty cool. Well, this over here, our dad was already corresponding with Pete Seeger in 1957. And I guess if we're going to try to record this, so I'll take it out because there's a couple of things I wanted to read. Can I do that? Oh. So Daddy had talked to Pete Seeger, I guess, and then went about, writing what Pete suggested that he do, which was talk about he suggested Daddy start researching Okemah and the people in Okemah. And now, this is so small, I can't read it. Because we cut it. Let's see. The people are good, friendly people, but it is a clannish town and hard to become part of the community. Woody still has relatives in Okemah, but due to the family arguments and a lack of appreciation of Woody, they deny any relationship. This is claimed by the town people visited, but the relatives were not actually approached. The town in general doesn't like to talk about Woody. It seems that he was part of, except for a few friends, nobody, after he left town, there wasn't anybody who really wanted to remember him. He was called a bum, and the family was crazy, etc. But he did end up returning to Okemah a few times. So this is basically kind of an outline that Daddy wrote in 57 of the research Pete Seeger had suggested he start doing. Oh, and in that it talks about, in that letter, he talks about Mrs. Chowning helping Woody. So this is a letter. This is a letter he wrote back to Pete in 1957. And here's where some of the family connections of Wines get. Dad, this was from,
Got about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, better go very fast. So this is when he would go to the bar instead of talking to my grandmother. And he got all this information from Colonel Martin. So someday we'll have to read through that. But so he visited with Colonel Martin twice on 2 different days, and he pretty much writes in here exactly the conversations they had. Now, here's the bank card. If you go down a couple blocks, there is the senior citizens. There is a sign in of Lena Creamy Landers. If you walk in the front door, there's a plaque to my Uncle Philip, and the first 2 pictures on your right are of my grandparents. Mimi, as we called her, was really sharp. She set up the Senior Citizen Center, and that is one of the places that we work with as the Landers Foundation. Well, there was an old pool table that was just falling apart, and the manager said, I think we've had this since we opened. And I'm like, no way would our grandmother let a pool table be in there. So Mother was still alive, and I asked her, and she goes, oh yeah, if you went to Colonel Martin's place, you had to put a dime or a quarter in to play pool. She bought a pool table, so that everybody could go and pay for free, and it shut the bar down. She knew exactly what she was doing. Crazy.
Good old me.
So, and the Stovall family, apparently, I've heard they've still got like a bumper pool thing for them. So just last year, we bought a brand new nice pool table for the Senior Citizen Center. I wanted to include this because you guys probably know Woody only saw his mom once after she left. And then they thought they didn't know where she was buried. And they ended up having a memorial at the facility, and Marjorie and Nora and everybody were there. And I included this picture, even though it's not from Okemah, but that on the right, that is Woody and Mary Jo. That's George. I think that may be the only picture I've ever seen of him. That's Aunt Maud and her husband. And they had there was a foster kid who lived with George and Mary Jo, and Fritz. I think that's who that is. And then one of the reasons I can never get through everything is because there's just so much stuff. And literally, like 2 days ago, I'm opening the blinds in the living room and I have stacks around. I see a stack on top of a bookcase. I'm like, huh, I wonder what's in there. I flip it open, and among other things, there's this letter to Mother from Mary Jo, to Mother and Debbie. And that is a picture of Woody that was taken in about 1930 in Panama. I know that picture's been around, but it hasn't, isn't one I'd seen. Now, this is to tell you how old we are, or I am. This is the three of us with our granddad, John Landers. That is Okemah Lake. So if you've gone out to the lake and seen all the building above that's what it looked like. If you go to the Founder, which is the new restaurant by Oklahoma Joe's, and you stand there and look up the hill, that is our grandparents' house. This had been our granddad's. He had an oil well servicing company, and that was their house. And all of the land from there across around wind it up. So, I forgot to tell it what that other thing was, and then this is the end. Whoops, can I go back to two? If you're at the Founder and you look to the right, those used to be barns. I mean, they used to be red. Those were Uncle Philip's oil offices. So it's like we're sort of super connected. And the family friendships went forever. So there's our mom, Susan, and me with Mary Jo. And then to the right is my favorite picture ever. Me on the left, that's Natalie Leventhal, Harold Leventhal, and Marjorie. And she was just the coolest person. And then here we are a few years later after the Woody Guthrie Center. So it's the Longstons and the Guthries. There's Mary Jo and Nora. So,
Thank you very much.
all right, thank you guys.